Scrappers, it's Mo, and welcome back to episode 3 of our AYO podcast. So today, for this episode 3, we have two wonderful women with us here today to celebrate International Women's Day. So the first woman that I'd like to introduce you guys to is Nadia Karimamlati. Hi, Nadia.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm pretty and beautiful as usual. And you?
I'm good, thanks. And the next woman that I'd like to introduce guys to is Vannary Kong.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good, just very grateful to be here. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being a guest on our podcast. So I'd like to begin this episode by asking you guys how you are doing and what you have been doing during this COVID-19 period and all that in the New Year's. So Nadia, do you want to go first?
Okay, my name is Nadia Karimamlati. I come from Indonesia. I'm a feminist and a historian. I'm currently living in Bonn, Germany, to pursue my academic career as a feminist historian. So I graduated from University of Indonesia, and I already wrote 2 books about the history of feminist movement in Indonesia, and currently I have a project about the decolonization of Indonesian history with feminist perspective.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. What about Vannary?
But yeah, so again, like I said, thank you so much for having me. So what I currently do is I'm actually a graduate student at Harvard University, and I study public policy and cybersecurity. And I currently work for a Department of Defense as a contractor. So I work in cybersecurity and threat analysis as well. And I'm currently located in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Some things that I've definitely been working on is, for one, I actually even just getting involved with a lot of the ASEAN involvement, launching the U.S. ASEAN Youth Council, and trying to, basically unify the Southeast Asian community here in the United States. And then other things that I'm also involved in is with the G7 and G20 summits, where I represented the U.S. on advocating for U.S. businesses overseas through intellectual property protection and rights, and just ensuring that a lot of these opportunities are also being provided for a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises so they can compete in the global markets. So other things I've been doing is been very involved with the global Black Lives Matter movement as well. My mother is Cambodian, my father is French Creole, so definitely something that I'm very passionate about too. And then some other things as well is just making sure that like my dear panelist Nadia said, making sure that women's rights are also being upheld here during COVID-19.
Yeah, that's amazing. So both of you guys are doing amazing things during during the past 2 years, and it's amazing. Let's get on to the questions. So the first question is actually about the United States politics. So as you all know, as the whole world know, actually, last year we had one of the most historical events in the United States and for the whole world. So back in 2020, we saw Kamala Harris taking the chair of the US Vice President. And, the whole world, even us, like people like me who loves reading about the US politics, we all went crazy over that, especially a woman being the vice president and also a colored woman, which is iconic, And international media were covering that. There were like news about it everywhere. And even in Myanmar, like there's everything all about it. We personally think that it's very extravagant, and it's been 100 years since we celebrated women's rights. My question to you guys is, how far have we gone from that time, do you think, like from that 100 years time to what happened in 2020?
Kamala Harris, her presence and her story, and I'll kind of start from local and then expand out to global. For Kamala Harris being of biracial descent is also very, very powerful for the fact in the U.S. during the transatlantic slave trade, at the times when white slave owners were having mixed kids with the African slaves, there was this society rule called the one drop rule that developed during the Jim Crow South era, where if you had 1 drop of African blood, you're considered Black and that's it. Even for myself, I wouldn't be able to claim being Asian now. But Kamala Harris, with her being very proud of being South Asian, really honestly changed that narrative for a lot of us. There's still some rhetoric here in the US which kind of upholds the one drop rule, but now we're in a space where it can be inclusive of all of our identities. So that's one aspect as well. And then the fact that she also shattered the glass ceiling, coming up, I know when she was representing the California, she was also doing a lot of justice reforms as well, because for a lot of people of color here in the US, there's a lot of inequalities, especially through our justice system, where a lot of, especially males that get targeted a lot, tend to be just filtered through the jail system. So I know she was actually fighting to kind of create that justice reform as well, especially as a woman. And then through an international perspective as well, just showcasing that the United States has a lot of diversity and not perpetuating the thoughts that we're just, like a monocultured society. There's so many different blankets that are interwoven into our society. And then just with her colleague, President Biden as well, his presence of also just trying to join a lot of our movements in through the international, whether it's the Paris Accord or with a lot of that multilateralism cooperation. And I think that this is a great starting point as well. We still have a lot of work to go, because as you know, a lot of our apartheid happened during the 70s, which if you look at history as well, a lot of the Southeast Asian civil wars in some of the countries were also occurring at that time. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, but I do believe we truly hit a milestone here in the US with her presence being the VP.
Yeah. I mean, not only, she's iconic, but also her vibes are immaculate. I love that. What about you, Nadia? What do you think about this?
Well, I don't live in the US and I don't have US nationality. So I think Vannary perhaps explained it well about the situation in US. But as a Southeast Asian girl, I find there is no extravagant about Kamala Harris as a female vice president. Because here in ASEAN, we had 3 women. We had 3 women in the head of the countries. First, in 1986, we had Maria Corazon Sumulong as a president in a Philippines. And we also have in Indonesia, Megawati as a first female president in 2001. And the last one is Yingluck Shinawatra as a prime minister in Thailand in 2011, as I remember. So I think US has to learn from us, because they struggle to have a female president. And yeah, unfortunately, it's only a vice president. So if we want to talk about a woman's leader, US should learn from us as a Southeast Asian. They are far behind us. But for another feminist issues, like abortion rights or land grabbing, then we suppose as an Asian learn from the US, because in a feminist and women rights as a citizen, perhaps they are far more beyond us.
So yeah, but I think like US is also getting there. I mean, it's taking place in history. So hopefully, in the future, there's going to be a female president as well. So the next thing that I'd like to ask you both is that, over time, like we live in a postmodern world where the main feminism idea has, developed to broader terms, such as ecofeminism, sociofeminism, etc. So coming this far, what would you say is the biggest challenge of women these days? Nadia, do you want to go first?
I come from feminist academic perspective. So I would say, like, you are mentioning about postmodernism and feminism. Yep. So feminist movement is actually divided. Currently, we have like 3 waves of feminism. And when we talk about postmodern feminism in a feminist wave movement, it's actually in the second movement. But right now, we are, they say, in a third feminist movement, and we have intersectional feminism. So intersectional feminism is a feminist that consists and accepting that women doesn't have single identity. Woman has a very complex identity. I'm a woman. I'm a wife. I'm also a graduate student in Germany. I'm an Auslander. I'm an immigrant. So I have a several complex layer of identity, and that makes me a woman. And that's why, because a woman is very complex and the identity is multiple, they have several struggle, and that is and also that is why feminist movement come in various shapes, various regions, and different demand in their regions. So when we talk about postmodern feminism, we will talk about writings, how feminists try to patriarchs out from literatures. But today we talk about intersectional feminism. We talk about not only female as an identity, we also talk about race. That's why when Kamala Harris won as a vice president, we celebrate that because it's part of third wave feminism. It's a part of intersectional feminism today.
What about Vannary?
Yeah, I definitely want to hit upon a lot of the topics that Nadia touched upon and expand on them more. There's a lot of, like I said, intersectionality within feminism, but one of the things that are starting to be highlighted even more is the inequalities that are faced within the community. For instance, whether it's Southeast Asia, whether it's North America, there is a huge colorism division where those of lighter skin complexion, mostly European or Chinese descent, are held to a higher beauty standard than those that are indigenous or brown skin collected. And you can literally see whether it's in classism or access to resources. And I believe through the COVID-19 pandemic, you began to see that the poverty gap was even widened even more, where those who, especially those who may not have access to technology, were even more far behind. I know personally when I went to Southeast Asia or just even in other countries, a lot of the poverty were brown-skinned people. So I think it's really unfortunate because when it comes to accessing resources, I think where the feminist movement can do a little bit better job is how can we support even more marginalized communities? You know, when it comes to future of work, when it comes to economic development, when it comes to protecting women's rights on the internet, there tends to be a focus on mainstream feminism, which supports lighter complected women in positions of power. But that's why Kamala Harris's position is so important, because now young girls who may not come from the dominant area of who holds the power can look at someone and say, hey, I can be like her now. I'm in a position where if I can work hard enough now, and if I connect with the right resources, that I can maybe be in a position of power, because right now that's something that's really, really needs to be looked upon right now.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm a feminist, but what both of you guys said, it's just like, it's so broad, you know, and it's like this big topic. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around what you guys just said. So with the above mentioned topics like that you guys just said, right? What's your main focus with feminism?
Okay, my topic on feminism, I'm a historian and I'm also an activist. So my current project is decolonizing history from patriarchy and also our past colonization. And based on this project, so I try to gather a lot of historians, first from Indonesia and second from the through the Southeast Asian connection. And we try to find the voices of the female and woman experience that been silent in a history. They're divided into several projects, and I also have a connection with other historians in other university as well. So that's my focus, because my study focus is to writing down a history of feminist movement in Indonesia and how the local, global can connecting to each other, and we try to write a new one, a new perspective for the future.
That's amazing. What about Vannary?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of projects that I'm working on that also supports the rights of women. From a local perspective, is also connecting with a lot of civil societies and NPOs, trying to figure out how can we do women's empower workshops and girls empower workshops to teach them to love the skin that they're in, to teach them that there's nothing wrong with how they look, and to love their true authentic self. And then in turns to provide those necessary resources where they can generate revenue and to find new careers that will uphold in this role of digitalization. On the global scale, I know for the US ASEAN Youth Council and just some other organizations that I'm a part of, we're actually working with a lot of multilateral organizations. So 2 weeks ago, we worked with the Organization of Economic Development, and we were talking about the future of work and what does that look like, encompassing everyone here on the globe. So one of the things that I'm extremely, extremely passionate about is how do we promote public-private partnerships? So one of the policy proposals I recommended both within the G7, G20 summits back when Saudi Arabia in the US, we were having the chair is, making sure that we're submitting policy proposals where governments are supporting private sector companies that provide internet access in remote areas, and making sure that technology is given to especially women and girls so they can apply for jobs, so they can have access to quality education, and even having access to whether it's food and applying for housing, and making sure that they're having their basic needs are being fulfilled through a technology lens so they can keep rising and keep meeting their goals and keep contributing as a global citizen.
Yeah, that's wonderful and very much needed as well. So, as you all know, we're asking you guys, this episode is from the ASEAN Youth Organization. So, most of the people in this organization are young people. So seeing feminism from the perspective of youths, like how important is the feminism concept? And do you think it's necessary to implement feminism as well as to be integrated with day-to-day school curriculum?
Yeah, of course. So I do believe that the historical aspect of feminism should be incorporated because historical feminism history is our world's history. There's a lot of powerful women that have ran countries, that have ran projects, that have ran initiatives. Even when you look at our current movements that are going on, they're mostly always ran by women. I think it's time that we actually stop this patriarchal mindset and start giving credit to when credit is due. And also when we're starting talking about those intersectionalities that are interwoven into feminism, it's time we also start respecting and honoring a lot of our identities that are so multifaceted in the feminist movement too, especially when you look at areas like Southeast Asia, when you look at the CELAC countries in the Caribbean, and even in Africa, skin bleaching creams are so popular. And I think it's time that we change that rhetoric. So those of us that are a little bit more melanated or complected versus those European or Chinese descent, we can actually start celebrating all of our skin tones, because whether you're in Asia, whether you're in North America, we have so many beautiful colors and everyone comes in so many different shapes and forms. And I think it's time we really start honoring all of that.
Yeah, and normalizing what they have and making them see their own beauty. What about Nadia?
Well, yeah, I consider that feminism is important for everybody and especially for the youth. Why? Because not only for the girls, the young non-binary, young men or boys like Michael here, they are also need feminism. So currently in intersectional feminism, we intertwine with sexuality studies, and this sexuality studies would open a door to curriculum, like school curriculum, to provide sex education that probably lack in most education system in Southeast Asian countries. So with these sexuality studies and SRHR, I try to remember what's the acronym for that. Sexual health and sexual rights, reproduction health. Yeah. So this SRHR is actually in Indonesian. So SRHR, yeah, SRHR agenda is quite important to integrate to school and curriculum agenda because it has LGBTIQ rights in that study. Why this is important? Because youth usually we are struggling with the identity. We try to define why I feels I was born with a female genital, but why I feel more masculine? And okay, I was born with male genitals, but why I feel like I'm so different? Why I'm so queer? And why people are bullying me? So I hope with this kind of perspective in SHRH, yeah, young people could feel and could find their self. They no longer alone when they're struggling to find their own identity. So through this feminist curriculum, young people would have better understanding in gender equality and better access on sexual health reproduction for abortion. And for what is a pill that's difficult to find for young people who do adulthood. I forget the name of the pills, like a contraception. Yeah. So I hope through the curriculum, young people could be understand their rights to have this contraception and to find their queer identity, to get their rights on sexual health, and so on and so on. And I wish school could teach us girls are equivalent valuable as a male. And yeah, a girl could be anything, not only in the domestic works like caring or being a housewife. Girls could become a president, like our previous presidents or our previous prime minister. And also, last but not least, I hope with the new curriculum, we could accept that homosexual are just normal. And I hope I could find someday a transgender or non-binary diplomat in the future.
I agree with both of you. Like going back to what Vannary said about normalizing what women have, also men, because we're both equals, right? And putting it into the school curriculum. And then also what Nadia said about putting sex education, which is kind of lacking in Southeast Asian countries. Coming from Myanmar, I can tell for Myanmar as well, because let alone talking about like feminism or just normalizing all those other actual good, perspectives and aspects of life. We don't even have a sex ed course. So it's like baby steps, but we need to incorporate also the normalizing feminism and also equalizing, is that the word? Yeah, so both men and women. So we know that March 8th is the International Women's Day, and this podcast is kind of directed towards the International Women's Day. So to celebrate International Women's Day, I'd like you to tell us who your female role model is and why she is your role model. So I think I'd like to share first about my role model. So I actually have two role models actually, and they're both female. So the first one is Malala Yousafzai. So as someone who values education and as a young woman as well, I really, really admire her. Her bravery, her courage, and just like she's just so respectable. She could stand up for her own rights and all that. And the next woman that I really admire is also a female, and she's actually from my country, and she's Aung San Suu Kyi. So after everything that she's been through and all that, it's like she can still stand up for herself, and she still didn't give up for her own country. And I remember vaguely she said this in one of her interviews about her house arrest that she was in a few years ago, or actually several years ago. She talked about, the interviewer actually asked her why she didn't leave the country. And she just said like, oh, she was given a choice to leave the country, but she can never come back. But because she really cared about her people in Myanmar and, her mother country, she didn't leave. And she literally sacrificed her family life, her, the rest of her life to give back to her country. So I really admire her about that as well. So would Vannary like to go first and share us about your role model?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. I definitely always like to hear different perspectives of other trailblazer women that are doing great things in the world. I have a few. Kamala Harris, that's definitely ones we don't have to go into that anymore. But some other key figures too. One that stuck out, she didn't really become my role model probably until 2015, but her name is Ariana Miyamoto, and she won Japan's first World Universe. And I think she came at a really important time, because then the question of what does the Afro-Asian identity look like in the Asian diaspora? And as someone who also shares that similar ethnicity, it's something that I've also really struggled with as well. And I think that having representation is very important in everyone's life, having someone that looks like you in these spaces. So being able to have the courage, whether you're facing racism in the Asian community or in the African or African American community in general, it's something that takes really a lot of courage, especially being in this space. And then some of my other role models that I look up to, I definitely loved Harriet Tubman, how she was definitely able to risk her life to ensure that a lot of the African slaves were being sent to freedom, whether they were going down south to Mexico or up north to Canada. And then just from a career perspective, she's actually my mentor as well, but her name is U.S. Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winsley, and she was the first African-American U.S. ambassador to serve to Malta. And as she was going up being a foreign service officer in the U.S., she definitely helped with a lot of the conflict in the Israel-Palestinian area.
Wow, that's very interesting, because when she was talking about Ariana Miyamoto, it was very interesting for me because I also came from a pageant background. So I, have full attention on, like pageant like such as Miss Universe. And of course, like Ariana is very, very, she caught everybody's eyes because not only she's beautiful and smart, she's very different from the like typical Japanese contestant, because she's, half Black and half Asian. And, like she strike controversies from Japan because, a lot of people feels like she's not Japanese enough and everything. That's why actually one of my friend who also an enthusiast of pageants, he wrote an article like based on feminism about how Ariana became, and her identity being Japanese, half Black, and able to represent Japanese in the Miss Universe. So yeah, it's very interesting that, you brought her up.
Yeah. And it's always hard to have only one role model. Like there's always at least two.
Yeah, there's so many, amazing women in this world who needs to be recognized, I suppose. So yeah, I think it's only come natural for us to have lots of, women role models. Sorry, what about Nadya?
Well, my role model is Mama Aletabao. She's an environment activist from Molo, Timor Island. From Indonesia. She received Goldman Prize recipient in 2013. Why? Because she and her organization she and her people refused marble mining in that village for 16 years. So began from 2006 until 2010. And they won in 2010. And the mining company stopped working. And while in that struggle, she had to hide from the forest and come to the village. And the special thing about her struggle is, first, she's a female. Second, she struggled not for herself, but for her whole village. She struggled for the future of the children in that village. That's why makes her very special. And when they are struggling in the 16 years period, she makes policy, not a policy, I would say like she tries to change the tradition in that village. So traditionally in that village, women will do the household and the domestic works in a village. But during that struggle, she has to tell the male to involve in the domestic works because the female and the mothers are struggling and have to hide in the forest. Wow. So the husband feels the domestic works and they keep running their household. and the husband keep the children, and so on and so on. And Mama Aleta, during this struggle, she got a lot of judgment as a mother, and the people like judging her like, oh, you're not a good mother, you leave your baby. But he said, yeah, I leave my baby, and my baby is taken care of by their fathers, and I am now struggle for the future of my babies and other mamas' babies. She struggle and she fights for things that they believe what is right, a future for their children, for their land, for their village, for a fresh air, for a clean water. And then later, the money that she got from that prize, she used to build a school to educate people, and especially younger generation in that village, about environment and equal gender relation. So she's not only an inspiration, but she really come and fight in a combat against patriarchal system and mining industry.
Wow.
That's amazing.
She's truly an inspiration. I guess, like classic. This is classic, but I guess it's true for most of, women, most of children, that their mother would be the first inspirations and someone that they looked up to, including me, because my mom is, she mostly raised me by herself. So not only she showed me how to be a strong woman, she actually do it, like by herself. She raised me, she works by herself, she gave me everything that I needed. So yeah, she's my first and my utmost role model. But the second one is, I think, Kartini, because she's able to be the woman that is out of her time. Like at the time, women are very oppressed. Women are not allowed to go to school. They only allowed to be at home and then be, the servant for their husband, to support their husband, to support the, the world of men. But she became, a person that is, out of her time. She thinks out of that. She wants the rights for women. She fights for it, and she's able to give us now the education, the Indonesian women now, the education that we needed, the education that we have rights for. And I think, I want to be that kind of woman who strive and fights for our rights, because in our world, unfortunately, there's so many things that women are still very, very don't get the opportunity for. So I guess us, all women, should be fighting for that too, by her inspirations. That's for me. Yeah, and we have to. Oh, if I could ask, how's everything in United States, Vannary?
Overall, it's great. Kamala Harris has been really inspiring a lot of girls and women, especially a lot of multilateral cooperations or bilateral cooperations with other countries and treaties. So I think from that aspect as well, but of course, on just the negative side of it, I know that it made world news about the insurrectionists and how they were downtown and everything as well. So of course, you're going to have that anti-Blackness rhetoric that of course is going to be in all countries in regards to that. But I think for the most part, just making sure and then just even with the political appointee process, I know that Kamala Harris and Joseph Biden have been very pertinent on making sure that the Asian community and other diverse communities here in the US have had that equal representation too. I know there's been a lot of cis and transgender that have also been getting a lot of roles in our administration as well. So making sure that this current administration looks like what the US looks like on a society level.
I see. Talking about Kamala, now we know that she became the vice president in the United States. There comes, many criticism about her, not only because she's a woman, then also the anti-Black, anti-Asians rhetoric and everything. I want to ask you both, what would you change, because we see the assumptions and also the criticism that people gave to Kamala. What would you change, if you could, about the assumption made by men or by this patriarchal world about women?
Well, patriarchy is about a system that filled in our head and implemented into a world history and public policy today. So I would say that only the male has this patriarch thought. Female also have that. Speaking of a male and female, I already say that each gender, they don't have a single identity. Everyone has multiple identity, like Vannary and me, we also have layers of identity. So I think the trap is when we try to overgeneralize. Yeah. When we overgeneralizing something, I think it's really a trap for us to move forward, even to make or try to do something, or even to make a prejudice of a person. We tend to overgeneralize, like what we have to do to what did you say, like advise a woman who struggle in a male dominated industry. Yes, male are dominating everywhere, not only the industry, even the politics, in the religion, and so on and so on. But I think, well, for the women itself, yeah, you know that you're not alone. We might be a minority in several parts in our focus. Like, I'm a historian, so yeah, as a female historian, we are some minority, but we believe that we don't struggle alone. We have you all here. We have as a historian, I have Anya, who willing to learn the history of Indonesia and willing to learn a new perspective of history. We have Mo, who struggle in her own country, who now have a coup, but still try to learn feminism. And I believe what she tried to learn and what she got from our conversation today, that would be benefit for her in the future. And even we have Vannary and her organization. She will do something today and tomorrow. I mean, we never be alone. And even the feminist itself, as a theory and as a movement, yes, they are parted into several categories, several waves, and several kind of struggles, but still they are uniting and they are united. I mean, yeah, just remember, we're never alone. And as a female, as a woman, we don't have to compete to other females. Just collaborate. Why not collaborate?
Yeah, true. Collaboration is what we need. Yeah. What about Vannary? What assumption, if you can change it, what assumption you want to change that this system of patriarchy made about women?
I think one thing in particular I would change is, and I hate to sound cliche about this, is the system itself. I know for a lot of, whether they're developing or developed countries, a lot of women have a hard time getting promoted in the workforce. We're literally getting paid less compared to men doing the exact same job on a personal, professional level. It's something that's very frustrating for a lot of us. So that's one aspect. But even when it comes to kind of like what everyone mentioned when it came to how we view our mothers, I know there was a point in time personally for me where after my mom came here to the US and she had me, and she did raise me by herself for a little bit before remarrying my stepfather, it was definitely very hard for my mom to even get access to a lot of these resources that were put in place to help a lot of mothers. So I think, and especially when you start adding in those identities like immigrant, refugee, race, economic status, education level, the system itself was created to provide, be a gatekeeper to a lot of these resources that are needed to promote the United Nations sustainability goals, and I think it's also really important too, because when you talk about the system itself and how it prevents us from progressing forward, that's something that really needs to be looked at. And then you have to take a step back and says, okay, who created this system? And it's the patriarchy. Yeah. So there we have a wonderful opportunity where we can solve some of these issues of dismantling the system by finding non-traditional ways to dismantle that. So that's why, for instance, I went into cybersecurity, how to tackle these issues through technology, and then providing areas or communities with this access so we can overcome these hurdles.
That's very amazing. Yeah, that is true. I think that, more than everything, it might be cliche, but I very agree with Vannary that if we can change, it's the system itself, because it's, yeah, the root of how we are treated right now, how women faced many difficulties and faced many disabilities right now. So yeah, that is very, very true. And I'm also curious, talking about, like the struggle for women. You told us about your mom earlier, Vannary. If you have, what advice would you give women who is struggling in a male-dominated industry, like your mom earlier? She came and then she faced, like many difficulties. If you have, what advice would you give? And Nadia as well. You were mentioning about, women who's working in the male-dominated industry. What advice would you give us women to get into that right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'll definitely be happy to give advice on this topic because it's something that we're all currently working towards. But the wonderful thing that I loved about my mother, she came here, she had a wonderful education and was able to build it from the ground up. And now my mom is actually a registered nurse. So she was actually administering the vaccine in the US as well. She's doing fine though. But we live
That's amazing.
far away. But one of the first advice I would say is, for one, I feel like whenever you're doing an investment within yourself or for the rights of others, you need to have your financial backing. So my first advice is to always make sure your finances and your monetary resources are always in order, because a lot of ways that you become a trailblazer in your field, whether you have to invest in education, again, financial resources, or you're investing into joining a professional organization. And I know a lot of times there's always like a membership fee, but for one is, yes, always make sure that's always in order. And then the second thing I would say too is, get an education, network with like-minded individuals. I'm so happy to be on this call with Nadia and you and Anja and Michael. It's really great to collaborate with like-minded leaders because you never know what projects or research articles, research publications can come out in the future. And then now, because a lot of whether these multiple identities, we have a lot of resources, whether it's through the internet, whether it's now we're able to apply for stuff, whether here in the US. And, you never know, opportunity might come from the least likely source. So always be kind, always be generous, always be ready to collaborate. And something that I've always said too is if you have a career that you're interested in, whether it's cyber, whether it's diplomacy, whether it's venture capital, obviously receive your education, but then make sure you do outside research, network with leaders in that field at the highest levels, figure out what made them successful, what are some big takeaways, what are some things that they wish they would have done when they were younger, apply for internships, volunteer with organizations, join a lot of, now we're in an opportunity where we're able to meet virtually, join international conferences. There's so much that you can do. And then there's also ways to solve issues. And I think that's what the beauty of this role of technology plays. And now we have systems in place where women and children and other identities can feel protected on the internet. And it takes literally a village. It takes all of us to work together to make an impact in this world.
That's amazing, Vannary. What about Nadia? What's your insight? What advice do you want to give to struggling women in the male-dominated
I think
industry?
now my internet connection finally stable. I can hear people well. Okay.
Yay!
Well, my advice would be joining an organization. So Vannary already said the primary things what a female and a human being must have in this world, like a stable economic, get educated, yes, and then join an organization. Why? Because female and women, especially in a workplace, they struggle to fulfill a lot of their rights that not yet they achieve. For example, free discrimination and free sexual harassment in the workplace. That's quite important. How we are as a women feel secure in a workplace if we are threatened by sexual harassment. I think women should organize in a workplace to get their rights to have a safe place and to get their rights on paid leave, not only maternal paid leave, but paternal paid leave as well, because it takes two to have a children, right? So I think those demands, like free from sexual harassment at workplace and a paid leave in during menstruation and after labor, after childbirth, I think those women demand should be fulfilled by these companies and even fulfilled by the countries. I think countries have to implement that as a public policy, and that's extremely important. And that's why women must organize after they get education and they get secure in economy. They have to organize to voicing their demand.
I see. A very interesting answer. Okay. Now we in ASEAN we always like to involve our community to the podcast. So we already prepare 2 questions from our ASEAN community that they want to ask to you. The first question is from Nining_Y187. What actions have been taken to minimize act of violence against women? So that's the first question. Anyone have answer for that? Maybe Vannary or Nadya?
Yes, violence against women is definitely a very large problem. I know now, particularly in the US, there's been a lot of hate crimes that were racially targeted, but women still tend to be at the core of the issue. So there's been a lot of laws that have been changed here in the US to prevent these hate crimes from occurring as well. I know recently in New York City, an elderly Asian woman was actually set on fire due to a lot of discriminatory views against Asian women. So what's some actions that have been taking place is there's been a lot of community coalitions going on. There was, in the past, there has been, after the civil rights movement in the 70s, there was a lot of divisions between the African American and Asian American community. But now, because there's been a lot of racially charged events, you're starting to see that community involvement, making sure that the elders in all the communities are being protected, making sure that a lot of small businesses or stores, if they're being targeted or looted or attacked, that there's that community support to making sure that a lot of these women are especially being protected. And then just making sure, and then some other actions from like the economic standpoint, there's been a lot of loans and grants are giving to women-owned businesses to making sure their businesses feel support, especially during COVID-19. A lot of companies such as Google and Microsoft have been providing free access to technology to making sure that the revenue generating is being flown throughout our country. And then just even on a global standpoint, the US State Department has been making sure that international women-owned businesses are part of a global coalition network to making sure they're being provided the resources as well. And then just offering more scholarships to women to go to school and providing free childcare and free resources for food. So those are a couple of examples of action steps.
Thanks, Vannary. What about Nadya?
I was mesmerized by how cool Vannary speech is, so I'm kind of lost in the question. Could you please repeat it again?
I'm always taken aback by her knowledge and everything. I was like, oh my God, Vannary, you're amazing. Okay, you can continue, Nadia.
In ASEAN level, so since 1995, ASEAN countries already ratified for CEDAW, Convention Elimination Discrimination on Women. So it's been going from 1995, and they have the conference in 1975. and it been ratified for Indonesian, they ratified to eliminate discrimination against women in 1985. So like 1 decade after they signed and ratified, and then they implemented into a law. So from a bill to a law for 10 years. And then I think in ASEAN level, in 2015, as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, they tried to make an agreement together to erase discrimination and violence against women. But I am not yet seeking into the documents and seek how far this ratification going and this agreement negotiation. But I'm quite sure that is one achievement for us in an ASEAN level organization to have like a commitment together to eliminate discrimination and violence against women. Because in Europe and Turkey already make a pact in 2011 to including domestic violence as a criminal. So now they have like an agreement and law through the Turkey and whole Europe to make domestic violence as a crime. So yeah, the perpetuate can be criminalized. So I hope that would be going in ASEAN country as well. I really hope it would done well. I don't know how. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. In Indonesia, what's been talking about right now is RUU PKS, which is the law proposing that sexual violence against women and also men and children to be taken more seriously, because right now we don't really have the law protecting women who are the victims of rape. If if there's no witness, if there's no the system, the law is very, very on the side of the perpetrator instead of the victims. So now, the some of the DPR, some of the representative came up with RUU PKS, which is the proposal for the anti-sexual violence law. But since a few years ago, it hasn't been talked about. The representative seems like they don't really want to pass it on. So fingers crossed that it will pass in Indonesia. Okay, so the next question is from @Citra Pesium. What is equality means to you? What kind of equality that you think is ideal for both men and women?
So what equality means to me is just several different aspects. One is that no matter what a person's identity, background, socioeconomic background, education status, is that everyone has an equal, in quotations, equal chance, whether it's applying for that job, applying for schools, fighting chance, and doesn't have to take into consideration a lot of these backgrounds because the system that was put in place would not exist anymore. What it also means is that now the representation that we've all been dying to see, whether it's the first US woman female president, or whether it's the leading scientists at NASA, looks exactly like them, where women and girls and other identities are able to see themselves in fields that we traditionally weren't seen. STEM, a lot of diplomacy, a lot of history. And I think that's what's really, really important, because now we're starting to also see, even at the academia level, that we're taking on a lot of new and innovative fields that didn't exist 30 and 40 years ago. That now, as the world's changing, we're needing to adapt to this idea of future of work, to this idea of digitalization. And I think another form of equality is seeing that, based off of where we're located geographically, that we don't have to have animosity towards each other. There's a lot of people, whether they're from developing nations or developed nations, that we want to connect with leaders like everyone on this call. We want to figure out, hey, how can I best support you? How can I best support your projects? How can I see you succeed? Because like I said, whether you're a woman or a man, cisgender, transgender, the whole LGBTQIA+, we all should want to see each other succeed at best support, because it takes literally a whole village. Not one person can do everything on their own. Everyone brings something to the table. of people are the table, and a lot of people are that connecting piece, but making sure that a lot of those old mindsets that we had in the past during our parents' and grandparents' generation, we don't have to bring that into the new era. We can, as young people, we play a role in making sure we change what the new normal looks like.
What about Nadia?
Well, I would like to quote someone when we're talking about what the equality is. I would like to quote someone. She's a feminist. She's one of a person that I wrote in my books, Dita Chaturani. I think she quoted from Audre Lorde, and she said, "I am not free, while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." So what the equality is, in my perception, is when everybody is free and no one is left behind.
I see. What is free though? What is the free that you mean?
Well, we will have like a 3 semester to explain what freedom is, because that's basically what I learned. I study dependency and asymmetrical and slavery studies in University of Bonn. So, but for this podcast, I will shorten it up into what freedom is. I mean, for me personally, what freedom is when you don't no longer care about something very basic like water access, education, or even what to eat tomorrow, what to eat tonight. Am I feel safe? Can I get electricity? So can I access internet? I think the freedom is when you feel secure about your surrounding environment, when you feel secure about yourself, then you could be free. And to implement your freedom to other people, there would be a challenge, because people doesn't live through your shoes. So everybody very complex, very different. And then sometimes we cannot like templating our freedom to other people, but such human rights, like what I said earlier, like access to water, access to land, access to internet, and so on, should be fulfilled so one could feel their freedom.
I see. That's a very interesting point. Okay. After talking about, like some perspective from you guys, we all agree that women, LGBTQ community are, like a lot of people are facing more struggle comparably to men. But so the question is, knowing that, do you think putting the lens of gender is important for us to see the world? How important it is to adopt a gender lens to see the world?
Well, it's goddamn important, since 50% of human population are born with female genitalia.
What about Vannary?
I agree. I definitely think it's really important, especially when you're learning about the history of how women and other marginalized communities were treated. There's this quote that I've heard from the United Negro College Fund, but it talks about, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So now that we have access to knowledge about all these previous historical events that happened to women or previous actions, we can learn from our mistakes and not bring them into future actions. And I think the other reason why it's also important, something that was also mentioned previously, is that when you think of violence against women, especially sexual violence against women, whether women are being forced into human trafficking, whether it's female genitalia mutilation, there are a lot of actions that are being shielded from the general public knowledge that need to be exposed, because a lot of human rights are constantly being violated. Even when you think about how a lot of young girls are being forced into, early marriage, there's a lot of young girls that are growing up and their childhood is being taken from them. And I think it's up to us as a society collectively to figure out, okay, this is the previous pattern of actions that were happening towards young girls, women, and other marginalized communities. How can we improve this so we don't make the same mistake again? And I think that's something that's very important when focusing on these issues. Sure. When it comes to constructing that society construction, I think one of the things that feminism and women leaders play a vital role is for a lot of countries, women weren't allowed to own land. They weren't allowed to work. They weren't allowed to vote, whether it's in local politics. And especially in the US, the suffrage movement definitely played a large role. But let's expand that earlier to postmodern day times. When you had the US election that just recently happened, there was a lot of people that were being shut out to vote when it's our right to vote. You know, I was a victim personally of voter suppression. You know, you have women such as myself that because of how brown our skin is, we're not allowed to, there's a lot of people in power that try to prevent us from even participating in local politics, something simple as just voting. And I was very unhappy because I had $60 just to make sure my vote got sent in on time. We don't have to discuss that. But that's something I am going to briefly mention. And then
I can see that you are fuming talking about
that. Yes, because it was definitely a process. And then something else that I just wanted to mention when it comes to creating that social construct was that you have women leaders such as the US diplomat Stacey Abrams, who saw these inequalities and who saw that these rights weren't being upheld. So what did she do? She flipped the state blue. She made sure that women and people of color had a right to vote and made sure that they were also being protected, whether it's through law enforcement or whether it's through a community lens, to make sure that simple rights were being upheld that were written in the country's constitution. And I think that's also very important because even what you see in Myanmar, you know, the government was supposed to transition, and then now you got everyone's rights being taken away. So what can be done? You know, then we're trying to advocate even at the youth level, making sure like, hey, can we help our brothers and sisters in Southeast Asia, because we don't want to see anyone suffer, because we don't like suffering ourselves. So I think that's something that we also need to also take a look at and take.
I see. What about your perspective, Nadia?
I'm thinking that if Vannary go to U.S. Senate or debate, she probably win because her speech is mesmerizing. I'm like, well, okay, yeah. If you go to election and if I am able to vote you, I will vote you. I mean, like, oh my God, you're charming in your speech.
Yes, please be, like politician in the future, Vannary. If I have the rights to vote, even though I'm not United States citizens, I will.
You guys can come visit anytime.
I barely have the rights to vote here in Germany, even though I'm a permanent resident. So that's bad. Even for Indonesian election, I cannot do that here because they sometimes
cannot.
Yeah, they sometimes don't get enough paper for the voters. That's crazy.
Oh, that's very bizarre.
Yeah, and by the way, so we go back to the topic.
Yeah.
If feminism
Let's go back.
didn't exist, what should we become now? We are definitely won't be here. We are not allowed to access higher education. It's impossible for me to get education like a higher graduation or even to university level. That would be very difficult. And if there is no feminism, perhaps there is no anti-discrimination or even this anti-slavery movement. I mean, each movement about civil rights, it's always begin with the feminist movement. Feminists and women who are educate themselves and wants to focalizing their demands, their needs, they get organized. And then they join other movement. Feminists never come up as a single movement. They always intertwine with the anti-discrimination. I mean, in the 19th, when anti-racist movement was very loud and proud in US, they intertwine with the movement for feminists to vote. So it's actually they are side by side. The women demand their rights to vote and the Black communities demand their rights to vote. Yeah, the suffrage movement all intertwine to each other.
Yeah.
Even in Indonesia, in the history of Indonesia and ASEAN as well, when we are struggling for our independence, and it's the women who's fighting for their own rights to get divorced. and they organized themselves. And the Sukarno said, "Oh, please support us to get our nation independence." And the women movement said, "Well, okay, but after we granted and we focalizing your demands, then you support us to get our rights to have a divorce." That was in 1928 in Indonesia. So I mean, in every social
wow, right.
movement, there always and must be a feminist movement comes within
True.
it.
Yeah, true. We will not be here if there's no feminism. That's true. Okay, as a closing, because we already talk about a lot, and I'm very, very fascinated by, your brains. Like, you guys are very, very, amazing. The insight that you gave us are very, mind-blowing. One last thing is I want, ask, do you guys have any message to our listener here in, ASEAN podcast? Do you guys have any message, feminism, how to understand it, and what is the necessary step to really understand about feminism? Because like we've seen a lot of people think that feminism is cancer, feminism is like it's bad, it's only about women trying to get everything, and then men is all wrong, like that narrative is very loud right now. What message you want to give to our listener? What is feminism and how to support it? What is the real cause of it?
Sure. Yeah, just to kind of summarize feminism in a couple of points. About one thing that I really wanted to focus on is that everyone plays a role when it comes to feminism. It's something that I would also like to kind of share with our male counterparts, is that if someone thinks that it doesn't have anything to do with them, I always pose the question, would you like your mother to go through any form of discrimination? Did you like it when your mother went through this discrimination? How would you like it if your sisters or your cousins or your nieces are trying to apply for a job, the same job that she's well qualified for, or just pursuing the opportunities that were not traditionally given to her? I always like to bring it to a personal level, because then people are able to empathize and learn more, and being able to show support, saying, you know what, that isn't right. I don't want my family members, I don't want my partner to experience this. And from a woman's perspective, because even here in the US, the feminist movement is so polarized, typically when it comes to race, and I hate to say that, but it is, something else that I would also like to mention, because for feminism, I always want to be the connector piece, because there's too much that's going on in the world for us not to work together. So something that I always like to focus on, saying like, hey, your sister's having issue getting housing due to redlining that happened before the civil rights movement. How would you like if you weren't able to get housing? And I think the other thing too is just changing that narrative. For so long, there was this negative concept that feminists hate men, and that's not it. We just want to make sure we also have a seat at the table as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we have multiple leaders at the forefront of this cause that can show that we are caring, that we do support, that we're here to help tackle any projects, and that we're here to collaborate on some of the world's most pressing issues.
Yes, that's very true. A lot of, the feminism narrative is, steer into the wrong sense of feminism, that feminism is, we want to collaborate. We want to make sure that everything got their seat and everybody have the same opportunity and, chance that they deserve. And, a lot of people, unfortunately misunderstood that, feminism is about women wants everything and hate men and things like that. But yeah, thank you very much for your insight and your amazing, amazing mind, Vannary. That's just, I'm still very, very blown away. Okay, Nadia, are you okay?
I teach in a class how to understand feminism, and not to get misunderstood by that, I will start by promoting my writings and my books, because I am writing a theory about feminism and a history of feminism, but it's
Please
in
do.
Indonesian language, so it's not inclusive to all of us. So what I usually do I will ask people in my class to try to reflect their lives, their identity, because feminism is your sensibility to seek the injustice, what is not right. You feel something it's not right and it's related to your gender identity, then it's feminism. For example, usually I turn off the lights in a class and I let people contemplate with themselves what they have been through with their gender. And most of them usually say that, okay, because I'm a woman, then I am unable to climb a tree. When I was kid, as a male, I am not allowed to play with dolls. So just a little reflection to ourselves, to our environment, to our experience as a human being. And that's how we can understand what kind of feminism we need. Because it doesn't matter what kind of feminism you believe, as long as it's voicing the equality.
Injustice.
Yeah, as long as it's voicing the voiceless, and just to try to solve your problem as an individual and as a community and bigger structure like a political system and so on and so on.
I see. That's very amazing. Like, thank you very much, Nadia, for your insight. And I definitely will jump to read your books after this and will promote your ideas too, because I think everybody needs to know your mind. Okay, so we had such a amazing conversations about feminism, I think, even though, I didn't I wasn't here unfortunately for the first half, but I'm still very, very much blown away by, Vannary's and Nadia's, your ideas, your perspective, and everything is very amazing. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Mo. Like, what do you think about this whole conversation, and what do you want to say to our speakers and also our listeners?
Mhm. So like Anja, obviously, I am very much blown away by Nadia and also Vannary's way of thinking on feminism, and how like you guys can just like immediately come to an answer right after we ask it, and it's like truly amazing. So like Nadia mentioned earlier, I'm a feminist, but also I'm still a young woman and a student who is learning more about feminism, regardless of all the military coup and all that happening in my country. So from what Nadia and Vannary said, it's such a very broad topic to discuss, feminism and like women's rights and all that. From, women leading countries. And, as Nadia said, 3 women are already leading the countries and all that in our Southeast Asia countries. And I honestly didn't even know that, to be honest. And to sharing our role models consisting of different backgrounds and, risking their lives and sacrifices to bring about a change for the other women and for the future of their next generation. So personally, I'd like to thank Nadia and Vannary for coming in and giving us their time to be a guest on our podcast for this special month of March. And, it's really opened my eyes. And also Anja's like, we're just blown away, honestly. With Nadia, who's working on a project and writing her own book regarding history and feminism, and Benry, who's the president of the U.S. ASEAN Youth Council, and sharing us with your, experiences and knowledge on women's rights and also feminism, And most importantly, I like to talk about how, like, why women deserve equality in this world, especially with like most leadership positions being taken by men and, dominating everyone, and, incorporating the importance of feminism into the school curriculum. Because when we learn about history, we learn about the history of war, the history of like the independence of a country, but we never really learn about feminism as a subject or a topic. So I think it's really important to discuss that as well. So I hope, like me and Anja, all the tappers who are listening to this podcast will learn more about feminism and see things from different aspects as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Nadia and Van.
Yeah, lastly, all of us in here, the ASEAN podcast, would like to say our very much gratitude for Vannary and also Nadia to join us here and gave us the amazing perspective about feminism. And we wish you the very best luck for your, project, for your activities, and stay safe, right? Stay safe in the United States and also Germany. I hope next time we all can, maybe meet after this pandemic's over and we can continue our conversations about, like being an independent woman. So again, thank you very much, Vannary and Nadia. I hope we can see each other very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mo,
thank you so
Vannary,
much.
and Anya. And thank you, Michael, for the opportunity. Nice to meet you all.
Mhm.
Nice to meet you guys. Thank you very much.